Mike Owens with Inside Fighting, joined today by Austen Lane, who returns to action next week, facing Mario Pinto in UFC Fight Night. Austin, great to sit down and chat for the first time. How are your emotions out of your return?
Michael, man, great to hear from you. My emotions, I'm feeling pretty casual right now, man. Feeling good.
Before we talk about the fight, this is going to be your third fight in a row in the Apex. How do you feel about fighting
Yeah.
behind closed doors and out of the sold out arenas and out of the screaming fans?
Yeah, man, it's a little different, right? Because you almost have to be a little more self-motivated fighting in the Apex. When you fight in arenas and you fight in, big venues, you have the energy of the crowd to help kind of help you get through that cage and
Mm.
everything. When you talk about the Apex, it's quiet. It's almost more like a sparring session, it feels like. I honestly like, I mean, I enjoyed fighting in front of crowds, man, because it's the energy, it's the cheering, it's the booing, whatever the case may be. But I'm kind of indifferent either way, man, because I've got to the point now in my career, in terms of like my mental mindset, that when I get in the cage, man, I'm so locked in. I don't even notice like what's going on around me.
Mm.
Like all I focus on is my opponent. All I focus on is my coach's voice, and that's about it. So, making that walk can be a difference, but then once I'm in that cage, it's all the same to me.
Is fight day actually different? Because I know that you're out in Las Vegas preparing for this fight, but is the actual
Yeah,
fight day different? Because obviously you'd be situated in a hotel generally if you're on the road fighting
yeah.
somewhere away from home. So how much does fight day differ or stay the same for you, but compared to the Apex as opposed to?
Yeah. So the fight day, it's pretty similar. Obviously, I'm a lot more comfortable. I feel
Mm,
like at the Apex, I've done it so many times,
mm,
and I've made that drive so many times. And I think when we talk about forming habits, when we talk about the mentality of a fighter, we always go off of what we know and what we can control. And I feel like sometimes when you talk about going to new venues, when you talk about, like, for instance, I fought in Australia, flying all around the world, there's a lot of variables that are different to you,
mm,
right? So when you talk about variables that can add stress, that can add different kind of things in your
mm.
mental psyche.
Yeah.
But when we talk about this Apex, man, like I've made that trip so many times. I've lived here in Vegas, for off and on for a while. I actually did my last fight camp. This fight camp here was at American Top Team, but I've got here a little earlier just so I can acclimate a little more. So it's almost like it feels like a comfort of home because I've done it so many times before.
Mm. What do you make of your opponent, Mario Pinto? I mean, this is going to be his UFC debut, but obviously done some good work on the regional scene,
Yeah.
undefeated. Give me your scout report on your next matchup.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you talk about Mario Pinto. You talk about a guy who's very skilled in a lot of aspects of MMA, right? You almost have to be nowadays.
Mm.
If you look at the resume, you see he's just a striker, but he's not just that. The guy's actually a pretty good grappler as well. He's comfortable on the ground. If you try to take him down, he has no problem standing back up again. So I think he's a very well-rounded individual. I think I
Mm.
kind of fit that mold as well. And I think the UFC knows exactly what they're doing when they kind of pinned us together. I think the thing that he has on me, obviously, is he's a little
Younger.
younger. Yeah.
Mm.
But at the same time, I have more experience, and I always say that age is a state of mind. It says I'm 37 years old, but if you see my workouts, if you see what I do in the weight room, sparring and everything, I don't move like a 37-year-old, right? And I don't really have the mentality of a 37-year-old. So I think I have the experience factor, obviously, but he's fought in the Apex before as well. He had a great showing to get that UFC contract, and it's going to be a great matchup.
I suppose you've answered my next question there, but I'm going to answer it nonetheless. I'll ask it nonetheless, excuse me, which is you've
Yeah.
made your UFC debut, you've lost, and you've won in the UFC. You've got over that hump. How key do you
Yeah.
think your experience will be in having those UFC fights under your belt be in this matchup? And is there anything that you feel like you can take from those experiences and bring into this matchup with a guy who's having his first fight in the
Oh, yeah.
profession?
Michael, without a doubt, man. If you aren't taken away from your experiences of the past, especially those losses, you're not doing yourself any favors, and I think if you reflect back on my career, especially in the UFC, it did not go the way I wanted to go to start things out with, right? I
Mm.
mean, my first fight, home soil, Jacksonville, Florida, it ends in an eye poke, and then we try to make that right and we go to Australia to have the rematch. I get clipped in, like, a minute,
Mm.
and then after that I fight a guy in Denez or whatever, and truth being told, wasn't 100% going into that fight. Maybe shouldn't have took that fight. I take the fight, I gas out, and I get clipped again. So, There's a lot of things that go into my losses and what I've learned from. But I think the biggest caveat, the biggest thing that I've learned, um, I have all the physical attributes, right? Very rarely will I go against a guy that's as big as me, that's as strong as me, that's as quick as me, right? Like that's God blessed me with all those things.
Mm,
What I was taking for granted was my mindset. What I was taking for granted was what I was carrying in with me when I fought people. And without getting too personal, but there was a lot of things that I was going through the past year and a half, 2 years that I thought like I had good, we're all good, but then I would bring those things in with me and they would affect my performance. I get with a new coach named Seth Dupuis, and he kind of schooled me and he kind of taught me on the importance of flow. And flow, for those of you that are maybe casual, don't really aren't an athlete, like
mm,
a flow is basically you get lost in what you're doing so much where all you're focused on is the task at hand. And you're not worried about the past, you're not worried about the future, you're stuck in that moment. And you saw that in my last fight where I kind of finally unlocked that flow, if you
mm,
will. And that was to the teachings of, once again, of my coach, you know, Seth Dupuis. So I take that mentality and then I go to American Top Team where a bunch of killers, a bunch of big dudes that are ready to throw down, and I apply that flow technique, and now I'm growing. And now
mm.
I'm getting better as an athlete, and now I'm getting better as a fighter. So that's the way I approach things, man, where I spent so much time worrying about the physicality of the sport and making sure that I'm doing my techniques and my jujitsu, my grappling, my striking. But what I failed to realize was, man, this sport's a lot more mental now, and I finally unlocked that.
Mm. Let's talk about your last fight against Robelis Despaigne. First and foremost, how important or how redemptive was that to get that first UFC win under your belt, given how your early fights in the promotion went?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, calling a spade. Um, my career was on the line on that fight because if
Mm,
I would have lost that fight, that was probably going to be it for me in terms of the UFC, right? And the UFC is something that I take very seriously. It's something that I've applied the past 10 years on, and it's crazy how it all came down to that one fight.
mm,
And I wasn't naive to that fact, but um, ironically, that was the most comfortable I've ever felt in the fight. And obviously it was billed as, and I'm not, listen, I understand what it was. They put him against me because they thought he was going to knock me out, right? And try to get him back on track. And I think a lot of people, whether it's journalists, whether it's, I don't know, I see people in my circle, but people like peers, kind of the exact same thing. Oh, yeah, this guy's a monster. He's knocked people out in 20 seconds and everything. And a lot of people were counting me out. And I think like when I reflect back on my sports career, whether it's football or fighting, I always seem to shine when the pressure's on the most. And that pressure was on me a lot, man. And thankfully I got the job done. Obviously, we used a big grappling game plan against him. But he was definitely a guy I respected because you can't really plan to fight a guy like that. Like, yeah,
mm,
you can get your sparring in, but there's not a lot of 6'7" Taekwondo bronze medalists out there. They're
mm.
going to give you a good look.
Yeah.
Right. So I essentially had in my mind where it's like, man, if this is it, if this is the last ride, I'm going to go out and give everything that I got. That's exactly what I did. I got my hand raised, and thankfully that was the first time my son was in attendance, and I got to celebrate that with my son as well.
To that point as well, Despain was actually released from his UFC contract after that. So the point that you're mentioning there about your job being on the line was proven true, given the fact that your
Yep.
opponent's contract was released. Were you surprised by
Yeah.
that first and foremost? Because there was a lot of hype going into not only that fight but also into Despain as a potential heavyweight prospect.
Yeah, was a little surprised that he got let go. I mean, I didn't really know the intricacies of his contract, of
Mm,
if that was his last fight, if he had one more fight. I mean, I was a little surprised, but at the same time, I think if you see the heavyweight landscape nowadays, man, the UFC, they want finishes or they want
mm,
exciting fights. Jaron Rosenstruck was a guy I trained with a lot at American Top Team,
mm,
and he was considered a top 10 fighter, a very skilled individual, helped me a lot during my camp. He got let go, because of a fight against Sergey Pavlovich that's, wasn't probably the most exciting, wasn't the most fan friendly fight,
mm,
but he got let go. So I just think nowadays, man, when you talk about the UFC and what it represents, it's still a sport, but it's still entertainment at the end of the day.
Mm.
And they want to see entertaining fights. So, yeah, I understand. Like my last fight probably wasn't the most entertaining for a lot of people, but I had to do what I had to do to try to get a win, obviously, and keep my career going.
I know that you had a long and storied career in American football. I'm not the
Yeah.
biggest fan, truthfully, in case you can't tell from my accent.
No, you're all good. Yeah, no worries.
Not a sport that I have time to follow, given
Yeah.
when those games currently pay. But
Yeah.
talk to me about some of the benefits that your football career had when you transitioned over to mixed martial arts.
Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing is that, because I played defensive line. So if
Okay.
you may not know what that means, but basically every single play is a collision, right? So
Okay.
like I have a guy in front of me and he's coming at me, I'm coming at him. And generally, um, I'm a lot smaller than the guys I was going against because offensive linemen all weigh like 300 pounds. They're all 6'6".
Mm.
They're all monsters, right? So you have to learn to be powerful in space. And I think that was probably the biggest thing for me was my explosiveness, my athleticism, especially when we talk about the clinch, especially when we talk about being against the cage. I feel very strong there. And I think football kind of ingrained that in me a little more. Now, it is pros and cons. I think the biggest con of being a former football player and then becoming a fighter is the fact that I was so programmed early on. And I finally broke this mold, but I was so programmed because in football, a play lasts 5 to 7 seconds,
Mm.
right? So if you see somebody in front of you, you go at somebody, you try to kick his ass, and then you do it again.
Mm.
In fighting, you can't really do that, right? Because
Yeah.
in fighting, if I see a guy in front of me, like, oh shit, he's in front of me, let me go knock him out real quick. Well, then now all of a sudden I drop my hand. Now all of a sudden, like my chin's exposed. Like
Yeah.
there's so many things that go into it. So I had to learn to be a little more patient, right? Like, yeah, you still have to have that killer instinct, and when it's time to kill, go ahead and kill. But you can't have that football mentality where it's like, I got 5 seconds to kick somebody's ass in front of me, and then we go on to the next one. That's not how fighting works.
Which sport gives you a higher buzz or a higher adrenaline rush?
Ooh, good question. Um, you know what? I think football actually gave me a higher adrenaline rush
Okay.
simply because when I played football, I was definitely more of an emotional player, right? Like,
Mm.
I mean, I was the guy that was like going on the field and like trying to talk smack to fans and everything. I think if you watch my demeanor now in fighting, I'm a lot more calm, cool, and collected. Now, I will say this: after the fight, after a win, I mean, there's no better feeling than that.
Mm.
I've played in front of, you know, my very first start, my very first game in the NFL was in Dallas. Played in front of like 70,000 fans booing me. Like that was quite the rush, right?
Mm.
But one of my first fights was in a honky tonk. It was like a small bar in
Yeah.
the middle of Jacksonville, maybe in front of 150 people. I knocked the dude out, and that rush that I felt from knocking that guy out doesn't even come close. That moment, it's so much, it's so higher than it was in Dallas when I had my first NFL start. So
Mm.
I think in terms of an emotional rush, it's football. But after the fact's over and you get a win, there's no better feeling than that in fighting.
Mm. Before I let you go, I have to get your thoughts on what probably is one of the biggest potential fights in the UFC at the moment, and that obviously is in your division with the potential of this fight between John Jones and Tom Aspinall happening later on this
Yeah,
year. First and
yeah.
foremost, do you think the fight happens? And secondly, if it does happen, who are you leaning towards in terms of getting the job done?
Yeah. Listen, if we're talking about the fight happening, like I said, it's the entertainment business. And we talk about the entertainment business, there's no bigger fight to make than Tom Aspinall and John Jones. So I think some way they're going to find a way to get the deal done and the fight's going to happen. So yes, I think the fight will happen.
Hmm. And who do you favor in that matchup? That's the
Man,
difficult one.
well, yeah, and obviously like John Jones, the guy I grew up watching, he's the GOAT in my opinion. He's the best to ever do it. But I think we've seen in fighting all the time where the younger guy, like eventually there's going to be a young up and coming guy that's going to stake his claim. And I think when you talk about Tom Aspinall's movement,
Mm.
his lateral movement makes it very difficult for a grappler to get a hold of him. And not to say Tom Aspinall can't grapple, because the guy is very versed in jujitsu. He's very versed in wrestling. Look no further than I'm trying to think of some of the fights that he had. I mean, he fought Volkov,
Mm.
submitted him. who else did he fight? He fought Andrei Arlovsky, kind of pieced him up a little bit against the cage, takes him down, and then gets a rear naked choke in like
Mm,
20 seconds. So, he is really versed in grappling as well. And keep in mind, like when you watch Stipe, right? And Stipe, one of the GOATs as well at the heavyweight division. But some could say, he wasn't moving like he has in the past. Some could
mm,
say, maybe he's out of his prime. I mean, whatever you want to say, the dude's still an animal. He's an absolute beast. But I think with Aspinall, man, really coming into the prime of his career, I think it's going to be a very tough challenge for John Jones, just because I think Aspinall has the quickness advantage, the lateral movement. He does have the defensive grappling if he needs it. And who knows, man? Maybe he tries to shoot a takedown himself. But I think in terms of striking, man, he can get the job done because he can close distance too as well. And that's what
mm,
people don't realize. But with John Jones, like Jones has good movement and he likes to stay long. But sometimes he goes with that long guard, keeps his head back a little bit because he's so
mm,
confident being the longer fighter. Aspinall has the athleticism to close that distance with his 1-2. He's got one of the
yeah,
best 1-2s in the game, especially when he gets off the angle. So
yeah.
I don't want to say John Jones is going to lose, man, just because like he is the GOAT and he's the guy I grew up watching. But I think it will be a tough challenge against Tom Aspinall.
Well, last question from me, and thank you so much for your time. Talk me through what the perfect day looks like next Saturday, as you envisage it from morning to night. Talk me through what the
Yeah,
perfect day looks like on fight day.
man, the perfect day. So I'm going to wake up. I'm going to do some, I do a lot of mental work. So I'll do some meditation. I'm going to go for a walk, going to get in the sun a little bit. I'm going to hang out with my son. I'm sure we'll probably play some football. We'll throw the pigskin around and everything. We'll have some laughs. I'll have my meals and yeah, just kind of take it as it comes, man. You want to sit here and say, this will be the perfect day. And then I sit out here and say it, and it never happens that way, right?
Mm.
So I honestly, I take things as they come, right? And then I react to things as they come. But I'm excited for violence, man. I'm excited to showcase the hard work that I put in, and I'm excited to put on a great show.
I love it. Well, Austin, thank you so much for your time. Great to sit down and chat for the first time. Have a great and safe rest of camp, and best of luck for the next fight.
Michael, man, I appreciate you, dude. Stay casual across the pond, and we'll talk to you when I talk to you.